It begins with a question that cinema still struggles to answer. How far should art go before it stops being art and becomes something else entirely? In 1978, a single film walked right into the center of that argument and refused to move. A film that looked soft on the outside, bathed in warm candlelight, framed like a vintage portrait, yet inside was a storm of ethics, exploitation, controversy, and uncomfortable truth-telling. That film was Louis Malle's Pretty Baby, and the moment it released, it stopped being just a movie and became a cultural landmine. Even today, decades later, people don't talk about Pretty Baby casually. They talk about it cautiously, carefully, almost in whispers, as if they're approaching a locked door they're not sure they should open. But before the scandal, before the headlines, before governments and critics erupted, there were just the actors, a trio caught inside one of the most controversial productions in American cinema. At the center was Brooke Shields, barely a teenager, stepping into a role that would echo through her life for decades. Surrounding her were adult actors, Susan Sarandon and Keith Carradine, trying to navigate a project that was equal parts ambitious, provocative, and morally complicated. Sarandon played the mother, hardened by survival yet still yearning for escape, while Carradine played the photographer drawn into this fading world of gas lamps and broken dreams. And standing above all of them was Louis Malle, a director known for pushing boundaries, who believed he was creating an artistic examination of a historical moment. What none of them could fully anticipate was that the film would eventually overshadow all their intentions. The story takes place in 1917 New Orleans, inside a world that many prefer to ignore. A red light district captured at the moment of its slow extinction. Everything feels decaying, suspended, and strangely intimate. The wooden hallways, the soft golden lighting, the blurred edges of a society hiding its ugliness behind velvet curtains. In this world lives Violet, a young girl who has grown up inside the brothel walls, watching adults bargain, laugh, fight, cry, and pretend everything is normal. It's a place where childhood blends into adulthood long before it should, and where innocence has nowhere to hide. Her mother, Hattie, moves through life like someone who has learned that hope is dangerous because it hurts too much when it breaks. She's loving but distracted, protective yet distant, always carrying the silent weight of a woman who has survived too much. When a photographer enters the picture, soft-spoken, wandering, fascinated by the fading beauty of Storyville, Violet sees in him a different kind of adult, someone who doesn't fit the world she knows. And from this complicated triangle, the story unfolds. A portrait of a child forced to grow up too early, of a mother trapped by circumstance, and of a man who becomes an accidental symbol of the moral lines the film itself challenged. But this is not a film about romance. It's a film about environment, about history, about cycles of exploitation. Pretty Baby doesn't tell a traditional plot as much as it watches reality happen in slow motion. Violet's coming of age is uncomfortable not because of what the camera shows, but because of what it implies about the era, about society, about adults who failed her long before the film begins. The real plot is the ecosystem itself. The district's collapse, the shifting moral tides, the desperate search for belonging in a world that commodifies vulnerability. There are moments of tenderness, moments of discomfort, moments that blur the line between documentation and drama. But through it all, the film forces viewers to confront a truth. Childhood, in this time and place, was never allowed to be childhood at all. And that's the core reason the film remains relevant, not because of what it displays, but because of the world it exposes. Yet even with these artistic intentions, the outrage came swiftly and violently. Pretty Baby wasn't just criticized, it was attacked, protested, restricted, banned, and condemned across multiple countries. The controversy wasn't abstract. It was direct, emotional, and rooted in the depiction of a minor within an adult environment. Entire regions refused to screen it. Parent groups demanded it be pulled. Politicians called for investigations. Critics debated whether the film was a historical commentary or a moral violation. Religious groups labeled it dangerous. And the film industry, already struggling with fears about censorship and artistic freedom, found itself in the middle of a firestorm. Even decades later, discussions about the film often circle back to one question: can a film be historically accurate and still ethically wrong? The debate has never fully settled. The production itself became as infamous as the film. People questioned how a young actor could be placed inside such a setting, even with strict control, even with assurances from the director. There were concerns about the impact on Shields, who would later speak openly about how the film shaped her public image and how the world interpreted her childhood through the lens of roles chosen for her. And whether or not the filmmakers believed they were creating something reflective of reality, the public saw something else: a line being crossed, a boundary breaking, a discomfort that couldn't be dismissed. In some countries, the film didn't just spark backlash, it sparked full legal restrictions, bans, or removal from theaters. But Pretty Baby didn't disappear. Instead, it became a case study, a film seen not just as a movie, but as a cultural artifact that forces us to ask difficult questions about ethics, filmmaking, adolescence, and exploitation. Over time, scholars have re-examined it carefully, separating what the film intended from what it represents now. Some see it as an important document about a historical reality. Others see it as a work that unintentionally reveals the flaws in the filmmaking system itself. But almost everyone agrees that it cannot be separated from the ethical debates that surround it. That's the strange legacy of Pretty Baby. It's both a film about exploitation and a film accused of being exploitative itself. It teaches us about the dangers of romanticizing history, about the responsibility artists carry when depicting vulnerable subjects, and about the difference between showing a world and participating in it. What audiences learn today is different from what viewers in 1978 learned. Modern audiences bring different expectations, different norms, and a sharper awareness of the power dynamics involved. Watching it now isn't about seeing an old scandal. It's about understanding how media shapes perception, how industries justify creative choices, and how conversations about minors in cinema have evolved. It highlights the importance of safeguarding performers. It confronts us with the uncomfortable truth that realism can sometimes cross lines without intending to. It reminds us that historical accuracy is not an automatic shield against ethical concerns. And ultimately, it proves that some films survive not because they're beloved, but because they force society to look at itself, its past, its values, its blind spots. And so, the film ends, but the conversation doesn't. Pretty Baby still lingers like the glow of an old Edison bulb, warm, haunting, fragile, and impossible to ignore. It remains one of those rare works that doesn't fade quietly into cinema history but echoes, decade after decade, reshaping the moral vocabulary of filmmaking. As the lights dim and the last frame slips away, one conclusion becomes clear. Some films don't just tell stories, they provoke them. They test boundaries, challenge assumptions, and force the world to decide what it's willing to look at and what it isn't. And in that sense, whether you see it as art, controversy, or cautionary tale, Pretty Baby stands forever as a reminder that cinema's power is not just in what we watch, but in how it makes us confront what we'd rather avoid.